But you know, go.
What is going on, six-pack coverage fam? Welcome to the FN Sports Podcast, the show where teachers grade sports' biggest issues. My name is Parker Ainsworth, perhaps better known on Twitter and Instagram at Painsworth512, definitely better known as your favorite history teacher, and I run the show here at FN Sports. Assuming you're a YouTube regular and thus new to the FN Sports Podcast, we wanted to help catch you up on who we are. We decided to take a minute and throw it back. I am a history teacher after all. We wanted to give you a chance to enjoy some of our heavy hitters or our most listened to episodes from our audio platforms. You can find all these and more when you look up FN Sports on those audio platforms. That includes Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a history lesson while we play for you one of our greatest hits. Here's what is for today. We're still going to talk some about Houston sports, actually, even if it's not the Astros. We are joined by Apollo Houston Media's own Taylor Pate. Taylor is one of the people on their Rockets team because it looks like there's a potential large trade that could shift up the NBA in the Houston Rockets' future. Feels like we're doing this every offseason with the Houston Rockets. So it's time to talk to Taylor about what the Rockets are doing and what is going on in the NBA. All right. So this week, FN Sports is joined by Taylor Pate. Taylor Pate joins us from Apollo Houston Media. He's an Apollo Houston podcaster and content machine with the Launchpad and other Rockets, broadly say content, lots of stuff coming out from Apollo Houston Media. I want to also say that he's a professional giffer, professionally makes gifs all over the internet with all of the Eric Gordon and other Rockets faces. But perhaps the most famous face is through Twitter and TMZ. Taylor, you've become famous for a Russell Westbrook tattoo. What's the story there?
Yeah. So prior to Russell Westbrook being traded to the Rockets, I tweeted because I thought it was such an asinine idea that that Russell Westbrook could actually wind up in Houston, that if he did, I would get his MVP season box score tattooed on my face. And then he did. And then Twitter found the tweet and blew it up. And I wound up on ESPN Radio and Sports Illustrated's Instagram and just all these places with, Rockets blogger promises to get tattoo of Russell Westbrook's box score. And it's, it was a whole thing.
So I've got to ask, is the tattoo hidden under some facial hair or, where a hat would go or anything like that? Or
no. So I actually used my better judgment and I did not get the tattoo. I'm actually really glad that I didn't. Now in hindsight, with him having only been here for one season, it really would not have been worth it. Now, if he would have finished out his career here, maybe then, okay, great. Like that's fine. But I think I dodged a bullet.
Well, for folks who don't remember, there was so much animosity in 2017 with the MVP and Houston fans and Westbrook fans and Harden fans and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm sure there were lots of tweets on Twitter about crazy things, but yours blowing up was certainly one of the funnier highlights of that whole saga.
Yeah. What was so crazy about it is like the light speed at which everyone had to change gears for Russell Westbrook. Like we hate this guy. Well, now he's on our team, so we're going to have to support this guy. What do we do?
Well, and then just like that, he's gone. It was not that long. Like you said, it was not a long-lived experience for Rockets fans.
It worked out.
You said that. You said it worked out. Speaking of all-stars coming in out of Houston, we're here because we have a thesis over another big all-star name who has been tied to Houston, and he's kind of similarly to Russell Westbrook, a controversial figure. Are you ready to grade some theses today, Taylor?
I am absolutely ready.
All right. The thesis reads, the Houston Rockets need to find a way to trade John Wall for Ben Simmons. You hear that? And what's your grade, Taylor?
I'm going to give that a B.
Ooh, a B. Interesting. I'm probably lower at like a C myself. Let's think about it for a second. All right, Taylor. So you gave this thesis a B, which, if I'm being frank, I think is on the high end of what like Rockets Twitter would be saying right now. Um, Talk us through what your reasoning. Why do the Rockets need to find a way to trade John Wall for Ben Simmons?
So my thinking here is um, you've got a you've got a liability in John Wall's contract. Not easy to trade. He's making $91 million over the next 2 years, and he is, by all accounts, kind of trying to reestablish himself and get himself back into like that all-star form. And we did see like flashes of that last season. But ultimately, obviously, the two sides have come together and said, "Hey, look, we know this isn't a marriage that's going to work out for either of us. So it's better off if we, separate." And if I'm being completely honest, no matter how much damaged goods Ben Simmons might be, I think there is a better chance at extracting positive value from him, going forward than there is from the John Wall contract. So the reason that I'd say that the Rockets should find a way to do that is because I think that they can get even if Ben Simmons didn't stay here long term and it didn't work out well, if he came in and played well for a year, they could turn around and flip him for more positive assets or draft capital or whatever, and his contract is quite a bit easier to swallow than the 91 million left on John Wall's.
Yeah, and so you're looking at this financially speaking, is how I'm taking it, right? Like the asset that is Ben Simmons, because he's getting 33 million next year. He's got 4 years left on his deal, but you're thinking Houston can be kind of a rehabilitation project for what's kind of become a damaged image.
Yeah, exactly. And like, here's the thing: Ben Simmons is an extraordinary talent. He's a 6'10", like guard forward combination who can, pass and rebound and is all defense or all defensive capabilities. And you just don't find this much talent in a guy very often, especially like as a disgruntled star player for another team who's trying to get out. And so all of those things come together to me to say, the fit may not be perfect with the Rockets. It might, not even be where he would want to be. But as a stepping stone, I think it's more than a suitable enough marriage for both sides to be able to get him to another destination past here.
Well, and so you're saying the on the floor, because I think we can both break down the on the floor flaws in the second with the way Houston's currently constructed, but you don't weigh those very heavily, it sounds like, because you think that he'd be on his way out fairly quickly. Frankly, not unlike we talked about Russell Westbrook earlier, right? Like a 1 year out kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of the same vein as Victor Oladipo, right? Like they knew when bringing Victor Oladipo in that, hey, we're gonna courtesy offer you this extension, but we're not, like we don't really see this being like a long-term engagement. And I think the same thing could be said, for Ben Simmons.
Ben Simmons is currently, like I said, making $33 million a year. Obviously, that's significantly less than the 91 over the next 2 years that John Wall is making. What kind of auxiliary pieces, because you did say B, so it doesn't sound like you're going to sell all out to make this happen. What kind of auxiliary pieces do you think have to get thrown in here to make this happen?
So probably draft capital from the Rocket side. And the only way that I'm comfortable doing a deal like this is not including any of the Rockets' own picks. I would say anything from Brooklyn over the next 3 years is fine, given the fact that Kevin Durant has signed an extension, and it's looking like James Harden and Kyrie Irving are signing extensions as well. Those are going to be like late first round picks, and it's not a huge deal. So I think anything that's not their own draft capital for the next few years is absolutely fine. And I'd even say 2 of those.
And so Brooklyn picks, but not like far future, like near future Brooklyn picks. And because of the money difference, you do have to theoretically get something. It can't just be Ben. It can't just be Ben for Wall and picks in theory. What else would Philly need to tie in to make this work? Frankly, what would you want them to throw in, and then what would be a more realistic shot?
Yeah, so I mean, I think ideally, it would be great to be able to get like a Tyrese Maxey or something like that. But that, he's in my opinion, probably everyone else's, a positive asset that would require more on the Rockets side of things. More than likely, you're looking at some sort of salary filler. Probably nothing extravagant, and maybe even somebody that winds up getting bought out or something like that. I think they probably want to keep Seth Curry. I know they would. From what I hear, they would like to move on from Tobias Harris's deal, but that would be a huge. That would have to wind up being like a 3-team or 4-team trade to get that kind of thing to happen. Tobias is making nearly as much, if not more, than Ben Simmons. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think that's certainly another contract that they would want to get off of.
Yeah, I've got down that Harris is making almost $36 million. At that point, you're talking about like, do you also throw, if you're throwing out the old guard in Houston, do you throw like Eric Gordon into this and really get a bunch of teams involved? And I kind of do want to segue there, because let's keep talking about off the floor, and then let's get to on the floor afterwards. John Wall is not the only older guy in Houston. He's certainly one of the more beaten down veterans as far as his injury luck has been. And it does look like, obviously, the report came out a couple weeks ago, he's not going to play a game. There are also talks about like not having a buyout situation. He is reporting to training camp supposedly, right? And he is in a mentoring role. Are there any of these other old guys, Gordon or Denwell House, or frankly, even a guy like
DJ Augustine?
Yeah, Augustine's a Houstonian. It feels weird to throw him in, right? Like,
right.
I could see him wanting to be a bench guy here versus being a bench guy elsewhere. But do you throw in more older folks into this and try and get them all out of town, or do you need some of those veterans around?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably pretty on the fence either way. I greatly appreciate John Wall's commitment to like being a stand-up guy and mentoring while he's here and like agreeing to sit and not make a big deal about anything. I think that's all, from the time that John Wall has arrived in Houston, he has been nothing but a class act and shown that he is willing to like do whatever the organization needs him to do. But beyond that, I think Eric Gordon's a really interesting piece for the Rockets because he seems to be happy in Houston. He doesn't seem overly concerned with, getting to a contender or anything like that. But at the same time, I don't think he would be, opposed to joining a team like Philly. He's got familiar faces in the front office and could really, really help impact a team that's like, probably right there as far as title contention goes. I think that would be a welcome change for him as well. As far as his mentorship and all that kind of stuff, I really think Eric Gordon is pretty underrated at this point in his career, despite the fairly large contract, I guess. But I mean, you're talking about a guy who's a volume shooter from deep, who's a like more than a plus defender, and is also capable of getting to the goal and like making the right pass. So I think that if the Rockets are going to go the route of kind of draining all of their veteran talent, you could kind of wind up with bad habits or like this defeatist attitude of, we're just going to be losing games and we're just kind of throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks. And I feel like the Rockets, the front office especially, they're really in tune with kind of where their guys' heads are at and wanting to provide them with a positive workplace and like being able to not have them go through like that 20-game losing streak like last season. They don't want that kind of attitude being around these guys. So I do think that there's definitely value in keeping guys like Eric Gordon around. And yeah, I mean, DJ Augustine's a Houston guy, and he's not on a very expensive contract. If you're not getting like some sort of nice offer, it doesn't really hurt you to keep him around. So I'm all for it.
Well, and it's interesting. Like, I think of the perfect fit of Eric Gordon in Philly, right? Where you have him and Seth Curry spacing the floor in a way that just opens up so much because Joel likes to play outside, probably too much, right? And whatever they get back for Ben Simmons, you think has to be some sort of a creator. In this instance, if it were John Wall, right, that's another guy attacking the basket, so Gordon's pulling guys out from the paint on that. I do think it's interesting that this is happening with Philly because like the Houston has been this like very strong franchise for the last basically decade. And about a decade ago, we were talking about Philly losing on purpose, right? Like there's this weird like we're switching who's building and who's trying to win right now,
right?
Aspect here.
And there's so much overlap between like these two franchises as far as like front office pieces go. It's such a strange transition. You know, you go from Hinkie and the process to kind of this period of them building assets and asset accumulation and all that kind of stuff to now having Daryl Morey in Sam Hinkie's place. But now he's also trying to get rid of some of the star talent from the tanking process. It's just a wild like series of events that's led us to this. And then not even to mention the fact that James Harden and Ben Simmons were nearly traded for each other at the beginning of last season.
Well, and that swap has to be where part of this, if we're going back to Ben Simmons on it, has to be where part of this like rehabilitation for Simmons goes because Philadelphia at the time, that was back like mid-January, right? I think it was like the 13th and the 12th or somewhere in that area. Ben Simmons at the time was the kind of guy that Philly did not feel like they needed to attach a lot to swap for James Harden, right? Like they thought that they were close enough in comparison that a disgruntled Harden was a fair swap without like throwing in a Maxey and some picks or whatnot, right? Or that the reports always indicate, right, that was the trade turned down was that Philly didn't want to add a bunch in. And so Harden's, top to an MVP voting 4 to 5 years, scoring champ here, scoring like we know those accolades. Now we're talking about an old John Wall. So on the floor, we've talked a lot about money and assets. On the floor, let's talk Ben Simmons and what holes do you see there if he were to come in? I mean, you're a big Rockets guy, not just in that you cover them. You're a big fan, right? And so what kinds of holes do you see in bringing Ben Simmons into the current Rockets roster?
Yeah, so I think Ben Simmons is he's a kind of difficult piece to just throw in somewhere. Like you have some guys that are just like, you can take this player and put him on any team and he'll be successful. Like Robert Covington, like it doesn't matter. Like he's a 3-and-D dude. Like you can put him on whatever team and he can do, 3-and-D. But Ben Simmons is thus far in his career a guy who has the ball in his hands all the time. And he's a guy who's initiating plays and he's playing from the guard position. And I think coming here, you've got the amount of time and effort thus far that's been put into developing Kevin Porter Jr.'s playmaking skills, kind of propping him up to be one of the franchise pieces moving forward. You've just drafted Jalen Green, who also with the G League Ignite was flashing a lot of playmaking potential, and they've made it a big point that they want him to be kind of that secondary playmaker. And then you've got like Christian Wood, who is kind of like a budding, like scoring big man who really kind of came out of nowhere and is a little bit surprising. You've got Jayshawn Tate, who's kind of like a poor man's Ben Simmons, but not 6'10". Like he does like just a little bit of everything. He's
somewhere. He's somewhere between the poor man's Ben Simmons and the poor man's PJ Tucker, right? He's somewhere in those molds of like positionless tough guys.
Yeah, exactly. And so I do think that, you bring Ben Simmons in if there's an understanding between he and the organization that, hey, this isn't necessarily a long-term marriage. Then maybe that eases some of that like on-court stuff. But I do think that there would certainly be an adjustment period where a guy like Kevin Porter Jr. is going to have to like give up the reins a little bit. And because if the Rockets are trying to extract positive value from this contract, they're going to need him to play well. He can't be coming in playing like a Draymond Green role where he's going to score like 7 points a game, right? That's not what another team is going to look for. Otherwise, they'd be doing it right now. They'd be trading for him right now. And so I think there would be quite a bit of pressure on Steven Silas to kind of find a fit. That being said, I do think that the front court of Ben Simmons and Christian Wood could be really dynamic and kind of offer a lot of versatility. And I certainly think that the on-court stuff could work. It just really comes down to like kind of egos and attitudes and stuff like that.
Well, and they would offer. So if the trade went through, you got Simmons. I'm assuming he starts in place of like Tice, right? Like he comes in and fills in that like 4-5 role as opposed to taking out Green or Porter Jr. because like you said, you've invested time and frankly a number 2 draft pick in your backcourt. So you're going to put Ben Simmons in the front court, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, right? Like is Ben Simmons willing to change positions and play from the 4 position?
Well, and defensively, I think you're like spot on. Like I see exactly what you're talking about with like Wood and Simmons, and frankly, even Taylor 3. You're like all switchable all the time, guard all the positions. And Simmons is a defensive player of the year candidate, right? I guess he hadn't won it yet, but he's also young and he's already been a candidate multiple years. He's an all first team defensive player. I feel like as I look at Simmons, that all makes sense. It's on offense. It's like if he's not driving creation, he's kind of just a dunker spot big. Is that, am I missing something there? That's all he can really do?
So the only thing that I've been able to come up with, and I'm not a coach, I'm not an X's and O's guy, but the only thing that I've been able to come up with is kind of using him the way that Denver is using Aaron Gordon, as kind of this ancillary like third pass in the possession type of big, where you can put Ben Simmons's like ability to get to the basket like to good use, but also have him be able to like flash middle and hit a lob to Christian Wood, or like I said, I'm not an X's and O's guy, but that kind of stuff where you have him kind of maybe catching that initial pass and then making that secondary play, and that more than likely would take a little bit of playmaking like out of his hands. Like he's not going to be necessarily that primary guy. And so like the numbers might not be quite as flashy or anything like that, but I think doing that opens up a lot for his individual scoring as well. And so it really, like I said, it really depends on Ben Simmons's attitude and like ability to, I guess, change roles a little bit.
Yeah. And being a pass first 4, I think most people jump to Draymond because Draymond will be future Hall of Famer that is doing that, right, with the dynasty of the last half decade, right? But you bring up like his game, frankly, has more muscle to it, more like what you're saying with Aaron Gordon. I think that's an interesting comparison because so much of what he's had success with in Philadelphia, he's crossing the half court line with the ball in his hands, right? And you're saying that they'd figure the coach would have to figure out some sort of way, right? That's up to Silas, but to get him involved in playmaking, but still let Green or Porter Jr. or whomever bring the ball across the floor.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there's a lot of leeway there because we did see a lot of possessions last year where Christian Wood was bringing the ball up the floor, and like you can run 2 like double screens at the top of the key and stuff like that. Like there's stuff that you can do with Ben Simmons having the ball in his hand too. And Steven Silas likes 2 big sets, and so that's like, that is a good thing. Yeah. I don't know how much in this offense he would be bringing the ball up the court himself.
We've talked on the floor. We've talked off the floor with money. In the last bit here, can we talk about, he has said repeatedly, and he apparently locked himself in Los Angeles and said, don't send any Sixers out to talk to me. We're all third coast people here. He wants to be a West Coast guy, right? He wants to be out there in the LAs or San Fran. I guess he didn't mention Portland, but people have talked Portland. Do you have any concern as a fan or analyst about him coming to Houston with everyone kind of understanding, oh, this is short-lived, or, oh, he doesn't really want to be here, or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I do have concern. And that's what makes the grade go from maybe potentially an A to a B, is because all of that really depends on Rafael Stone and Steven Silas and the front office being able to sit down and have this conversation with Ben and say, like, look, if this isn't where you want to be long term, and if this isn't going to be like, if Houston isn't your final destination, then like we need to figure something out that's beneficial for both sides. And like that would be a big prerequisite for me.
Well, and so you don't actually want Ben Simmons to play the next 4 years of his contract in Houston, doesn't sound like. You just see the value in Simmons versus Wall. And I got to say, is this the kind of thing that we want to pull the trigger on, like, as camp is starting? Because camp starts this week for a lot of franchises, right? Like, with camp starting, you want to pull this right now? Do you, like, give Wall a month or two as your assistant coach? Like, are you calling Philadelphia tomorrow to make this happen?
I think if the call came through tomorrow, I feel like the Rockets would be remiss to say no. I think you get it done and then you figure it out. Because Philly's obviously had its struggles thus far with kind of finding a trade partner, obviously. But the further you get into a season, like if a team starts getting desperate, if something starts happening where, maybe this team is not quite playing as well as they had hoped or something like that, then they all of a sudden become willing to give up, more assets and driving up the price. So I do think that if you can get it done, sooner rather than later, then you do that.
Last question, I guess, for you, Taylor, and this is really the fan in me, right? People listen to the show know that I'm a Rockets guy, and so I was excited to have you on. Why are we always the team that's swapping stars? It feels like you can't buy a jersey. Even James Harden's gone very quickly, and suddenly, like, I feel like whether it's we had Dwight, and we had Chris, then we had Russ, we've had James, we had, it was a 9-year experiment because of the injuries and stuff like injuries and people coming in and out seems to just happen with the Rockets. Why have we been like the centerpiece for all these stars? We almost got Aldridge. We almost got Bosch. Like we're in all these talks all the time, it feels like.
I think so much of that revolves around Daryl Morey's like hyper fixation in like the early to mid James Harden years of like getting all the star accumulation that he could. And so he was just in every single star that came available, to acquire them, no matter what the cost. And then I think towards the end of his time in Houston, I think what happened is, you've got this window and like, we don't know necessarily what was going on, behind closed doors, but I'm sure there was a sense of desperation. Like we have to like make James happy. We've got to figure out what to do. And so that leads to this revolving point guard door of like Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, John Wall, and now who knows, Ben Simmons maybe. And what a wild like series of 4 years that could be. And it's like this carousel of guys just, coming in the same contract position. It's just, I think so much of it comes from, early on, Daryl Morey he was determined to get somebody to pair with James, and he didn't know who, but everyone, you know what I mean?
Everyone,
whoever. And so then you get towards the end of this really like nice, really good run for the Rockets and Daryl Morey and James Harden, and it starts to get ugly. And that's like when you start to see like when a franchise starts to go from playoff contender to rebuilding to like borderline tanking, like you're going to start to see some of those guys just start to rotate in and out, and you're going to pick up some bad contracts along the way.
Completely. You say borderline tanking. Wall called it a season pretty early, and Wood, I'm not saying Wood's injury wasn't serious, but he definitely took a long time to come back. Like it certainly felt like we're like, oh, if we just got the top 4 pick and we end up getting the number 2 overall pick, it won't be so bad, right? That certainly kicked in at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the losing streak certainly took its toll on guys, and I don't think anybody really, was trying to lose games. I think once the health bug started to rear its head, I think everybody around was just kind of like, all right, it's not our year. Like we got to stop and just take our lashes.
Completely. And again, organizations tank, not players. The players on the floor are obviously playing. As far they want to win, they have incentives. And frankly, even if they want out of this, dumpster fire of a losing season, they got to play well to get to the next place. It's not players that are doing that. It's definitely teams. It's just was interesting to watch. Taylor, obviously, you're going to be covering the Rockets all year long. Frankly, this trade, it feels like we're just going to wake up one morning and have a Woj bomb for the middle of the night. Where can people find you and your stuff at to keep up with this kind of story?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Taylor L. Pate. And then you can also find my shirt designs and my blogs and stuff like that on apollohou.com.
Apollo HOU. It's if you are at all interested in Houston sports, they've got your Astros, the Houston Cougars. Taylor's got the Rockets. They're dabbling in the Houston Texans football team, which frankly is kind of what the Houston Texans football team is doing too. They're doing a little bit of dabbling in football, it sounds like. But fun gear, all kinds of fun stuff for Houston sports fans. So be sure to check out apollohou.com and Taylor L. Pate on Twitter. Thanks so much for coming on, Taylor.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to help us out, hit that subscribe button below. Find us on a couple of those audio outlets and do the same. Be sure to catch us on social media. Our Twitter handle is at FNSports2. And on Instagram, we're at F_in_sports. Through both those, you'll be able to find our sponsors like Yeti Coolers and MyBookie, as well as a link to our merch store where you can let everyone know you are not one to be flunked with. We have a number of items, including a monthly Charitable Cause shirt, so be sure to check all of that out via our social media handles. Again, on Twitter at FNSports2, FINSPORTS2, and on Instagram at F_in_sports. Like, subscribe, follow, rate, review, do all the wonderful things to help with the podcast, and whatever you do, just remember, don't flunk with us. Later, guys.